You gave them everything. Not as a figure of speech, actually everything. The weekends you didn't rest, the retirement money you didn't keep, the dreams you quietly set aside because someone else needed something first. You gave and gave and gave, and you told yourself that's what a good father does, a good husband, a good man. And now you're sitting in a house that feels too quiet, and you're wondering, honestly wondering, whether any of it meant what you thought it meant. If that's where you are, I want you to know something before we go any further. You are not wrong to feel that, and you are not alone in feeling it. But I also want to tell you what I learned, after a long time of getting this wrong, about what giving really is, and what we sometimes do in its name without realizing it. Stay with me, this one matters. I was 26 years old when my first child was born. I remember standing in the hospital hallway, this was before they let fathers in the room for everything, and thinking one very clear thought, whatever this child needs, I will find a way. That thought became the architecture of my life for the next 50 years. Whatever they needed, I would find a way. And I did. I found ways I didn't know I had. I worked jobs I didn't love. I stayed in situations longer than was good for me. I said yes when I meant not yet, and I said yes when I meant no, and I said yes when I genuinely had nothing left to give, because that's what you do. That's what I believed. Let me tell you what the giving actually looked like. Not in general, specifically. I paid for my son's first apartment when he lost his job. I co-signed a loan for my daughter's car when her credit wasn't there yet. I helped with the down payment on their first house. I flew out twice when the grandchildren were born and stayed for 2 weeks each time to help get things settled. I paid for 2 college tuitions. Partly loans, partly savings, partly things I just figured I would make up later. I showed up when things broke. Furnaces and marriages and plans. I drove hours without being asked. I sat in waiting rooms. I wrote checks. I was present. I want to be clear about that because what comes next is not a complaint about my children. They are not bad people. They were not cruel. What comes next is about something else entirely. When I was 68, I sat down to look at what I had, not what I'd given, what remained. The number was smaller than it should have been, not dramatically, not catastrophically, but smaller. I had planned for a certain kind of retirement, not extravagant, just comfortable, a little travel, time to breathe, time to do the things I had been deferring since I was 26. The deferring had added up, and I remember sitting there looking at that number and feeling something I hadn't expected. Not anger, not regret. Something quieter, a kind of tiredness that goes all the way down. I had been saying later for 40 years, and now later had arrived, and there was less of it than I had planned. I didn't say anything about it for a long time. That's important to understand. I didn't sit my children down. I didn't write a letter. I didn't even tell my wife the full extent of what I was feeling, not because she wouldn't have understood, but because I wasn't sure I understood it yet myself. What I did instead was what a lot of men of my generation do. I got quiet, and then I got a little sharp. Not loud, just pointed. Small things. A comment about how busy everyone was, a pause before answering when they called, a particular tone when I said I'm fine. I didn't think of this as resentment. I would have objected to that word, but that's what it was. A low, slow burn that had no target and no name. Just a man in his late 60s who had given a great deal and wasn't sure what he'd received in return and couldn't figure out how to say that without sounding like he was asking to be thanked, which he was, which I was, but couldn't admit. Here's what I've come to understand about the giving I did. Not all of it was what I thought it was. Some of it, most of it, honestly, came from love, real love, the kind that doesn't keep score, but some of it came from somewhere else. Some of it came from needing to be needed. Some of it came from the identity I had built around being the one who provides, the one who shows up, the one who holds things together, because if I was the one who gave everything, then I was indispensable, I was central, I mattered in a way that was concrete and measurable. When I gave, no one could question whether I was a good father. The giving was also self-protection. I didn't see that for a long time. I don't think I could afford to see it. The conversation that changed things happened about 4 years ago. My son came to visit. Just him, no kids, no agenda. We went for a walk, and somewhere in the middle of it he said something I wasn't prepared for. He said, "Dad, I've always felt like I owe you something, and I've never known how to pay it back, and it's exhausting." I stopped walking. I didn't know what to say. He wasn't accusing me. His voice was quiet. He was telling me something true, the way people only do when they finally trust you enough to risk it. He said the giving had always come with a weight, not a spoken weight, not conditions anyone wrote down, just a feeling that it wasn't quite free, that there was an account somewhere, and it was accruing. I had never put it there intentionally, but it was there. I want to be honest about what it felt like to hear that. It felt like being handed something very cold. My first instinct was to defend myself, to say, "I never asked for anything back. I never made you feel that way." And technically that was true. But as I walked alongside my son in silence, I began to understand something. Giving with no strings attached, real giving, doesn't create that feeling in the recipient. When someone gives freely, with no invisible ledger, no quiet longing to be repaid in gratitude or presence or loyalty, the person who receives it feels light. What my son was describing was not the feeling of being freely given to. It was the feeling of being in debt, and I had created that. Without words, without intention, without ever knowing I was doing it. I've spent a lot of time since then thinking about where that debt feeling came from. And I think it comes from this: when we give from a place of genuine abundance, when we help because we want to, because we can, because it brings us joy, the giving has no residue. But when we give from a place of need, our need to be central, to be thanked, to be sure we matter, the giving leaves something behind, something the other person can feel even when they can't name it. My children felt it. They felt it their whole lives. And they loved me anyway, and they received what I gave anyway, and they tried their best to be grateful anyway. But underneath all of it was a low-level tension, a sense that the ground was not quite free. Now, I am not saying that everything I gave was tainted by need. It wasn't. Most of it was genuine. I'm not here to tear down 50 years of love and reduce it to psychology. What I'm saying is that even within a loving relationship, even in a life well lived and genuinely given, there can be a thread of the wrong thing woven in, and that thread, subtle as it is, can be the thing that creates distance. Not the love, not the sacrifice, not the showing up. The invisible expectation of return, the quiet waiting to be seen. When I understood this, and it came slowly, over months, not in a single flash, I did something I had not done in 60-something years of adulthood. I stopped keeping score, not as a decision I announced, not as a grand gesture. I just quietly put the ledger down. I stopped tracking who had called and who hadn't. I stopped noting when they forgot to thank me. I stopped measuring my worth by how often they needed me. And something happened that I did not expect. I started feeling better. Not because the situation had changed, not because my children suddenly called more or came around more often, but because I wasn't waiting anymore. And waiting, that low, constant, invisible waiting to be recognized, had been exhausting me for years without my knowing it. I want to say something about what the giving actually produced, because I don't want you to walk away from this thinking it was wasted. Thinking that if the family didn't return it in the way you hoped, then it meant nothing. That is not what I believe. My children grew up with security. Not perfect security, but a floor beneath them that held. They took risks in their lives, career risks, creative risks, the kind of risks that require knowing someone has your back, because somewhere underneath all of it, they knew I was there. They may not have articulated that. They may not even know it consciously. But it's in them. The way things that are given early go into people and become part of how they stand in the world. That is not nothing. That is in fact quite a lot. My daughter called me last spring. She had just come through something hard, a difficult season in her marriage. the kind that either breaks things or builds them stronger. She called to tell me it was going to be okay, and at the end of the call, she said something I have thought about every day since. She said, "Dad, I think I got through it because I always knew, no matter what, you would be there, even when I didn't call, even when I was too proud to ask. I always knew." I sat with the phone in my hand for a long time after she hung up. That is what the giving produced. Not gratitude on my timeline, not the return I was waiting for, not the recognition I had been quietly tallying, just a woman who knew she was not alone in the world because of something I built, over 50 years, one ordinary act at a time. I am not going to tell you that everything worked out perfectly. It didn't. There is still money I don't have. There are still calls I wait for. There are still holidays that feel smaller than I'd like, but I have put down the ledger. And I have started measuring things differently, not by what came back to me, by what I put into them. And when I measure it that way, honestly, without the bitterness that used to color everything, what I see is a life that was spent in service of people I love. That is not a small thing to be able to say. Most people never get to say it with any truth behind it. I can. Here is what I want to leave you with. If you have given everything, if you are sitting somewhere right now feeling like the account ran dry and no one noticed, I want you to hear this. The giving was real. The love was real. The sacrifice was real. What may not have been real, or what may have been only partly real, is the story you told yourself about why you were giving, and what you expected to happen because of it. That story is worth looking at, not to punish yourself, not to take back the giving, but to put it down cleanly, to stop waiting for the return that may come late, or differently than you imagined, or not at all in the form you hoped for. Because the waiting is what makes the giving heavy, and the giving, freely given, cleanly given, without the ledger, is one of the finest things a human being can do. You did that for a long time. That counts. If something in this touched you today, if you recognized yourself in any part of it, I'd be glad to hear from you. Leave a comment, tell me what you gave, tell me what came back, tell me what you're still waiting for. We don't talk about these things enough, not honestly, not without performing either bitterness or gratitude. This channel is for the real version. If that matters to you, please subscribe. We're here every week with something made for the quiet years, the ones that deserve more honesty than they usually get. Thank you for giving me your time today. That I will not take for granted.